If you've had any cryptid encounters you'd like shared on here, email me at jttosstories@gmail.com. Story 1. This happened in 2015 near Marlin, Texas. I worked on a small cattle ranch at the time. It was bordered by a medium-sized creek. This area has slightly hilly pastures with thick oak forest interspersed between them. On my days off at the ranch, I like to hunt the creek for arrowheads and fossils. The section of creek near the ranch was 8 feet deep, so I had to use a kayak to go upstream to a shallow area with gravel bars. It was a 30-minute paddle to the gravel bars, and I often saw wildlife on the trip. 15 minutes into this trip, I came upon 2 deer on the creek bank. One cool thing about kayaking is that deer don't know what you are, so they let you get real close. I started slowly paddling towards them. They were looking at me the whole time. When I got about 20 yards away, they suddenly reacted to something back down the creek, snorted, then ran off. Anyone familiar with deer knows that when they snort, they catch wind of danger. The hunters here probably know the sound all too well. I turned to look for what spooked the deer. 75 yards downstream, a hairy humanoid figure was leaning over the creek bank. It held onto a large oak branch with one arm to keep itself from falling in. My vision went blurry, except for the figure. From where I was, I could only see the upper torso. It was the mid-afternoon, and the creature was backlit. Its fur hung down 2 to 3 inches on its arm. It looked black, but the fur was also brown where the sun shined on it. I couldn't make out any detail on the face. We looked at each other for maybe 6 to 10 seconds, then it pulled itself back behind the tree. The brush was thick enough that I couldn't see it walk away. It took me a minute to process what I saw. When I snapped out of it, I decided to check out where the creature was standing to get a height reference. It took 10 minutes to paddle back and find the oak tree. The brush that covered its lower body was about 3 feet tall, so I estimated the creature was a little over 6 feet. I searched the surrounding area. There was no trace of it. The ground was hard gray clay covered in leaves. It's nearly impossible to track wounded game through this stuff without a blood trail. I checked the bark and briar vines nearby for hair and found none. The experience shook me up, so I went back to the ranch house and told my boss what happened. She was an older woman from Connecticut that wanted to retire and run a ranch for fun. She reacted skeptically, but mentioned the cows had been acting strange recently. They normally slept in the pasture adjacent to the creek, but started sleeping close to the barn a few days prior. The property was 2 60-acre pastures shaped like an L. The creek ran along the bottom leg of the L, and the barn was at the tip of the top leg. I spent the next few weeks trying not to think about what I saw. When I was in the lower pasture, I started getting chills, and I felt like I was being watched. My boss even joked about wanting to test me for illicit substances. Eventually, the cows' sleep patterns went back to normal, and I didn't feel weird around the creek. A month after the first encounter, I decided to go hog hunting in the lower pasture. I had a tree stand overlooking a corn feeder along the creek's tree line. On a normal summer hunt, I get to the stand at 6:30 p.m., the feeder goes off at 7, then the hogs come in at somewhere between 7:30 and 8:30. On this occasion, everything went according to plan. I got settled, the feeder went off, and I started waiting. Nothing came in. By 9, it was getting too dark to see through the scope. As I was preparing to climb down, I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like a group of hogs were pushing through the brush. I slowly shouldered my rifle and preemptively took aim below the feeder. Normally, hogs make soft grunting sounds while running to the feeder. I didn't hear any, so I assumed it was deer coming in. The noise abruptly stopped about 20 yards behind me. I waited a few minutes, then decided to climb down and investigate. Whatever came in hadn't made any noise as it ran off. When I got down, I was hit with a faint, musky, rotten egg smell. I only caught a whiff on the wind for a few seconds. Nothing strange happened after that. I continued to work the ranch for another year. Eventually, my boss gave up ranching and moved back to Connecticut. I'm sure she still talks about the crazy kid who worked for her. Story 2. My face-to-face encounter with the Wolfman. 11 p.m., July 24th, 2010. Here we go. This encounter is 100% true, and 4 other guys can verify it. We all grew up in Wisconsin. We were going to go fishing one night on the Galena River. It flows into southern Wisconsin, called the Fever River there. We fished for smallmouth, but when we were lining the reels of our poles in the car trunk, someone slammed the trunk shut and broke off all the tips. There goes our fishing night. We called their girlfriends, but they were having a girls' night. We decided to take the first and last trip we ever would, down to Council Hill, Illinois. Apparently, there was a real haunted house called the Abley House. Legend is that the dad heard voices in the cellar and went crazy and wiped out his family in the 1860s. I drove my 4-door sedan, my buddy Rob rode shotgun. Tanner, Preston, and Chaz rode in the back. It took us about 45 minutes to get there from Hazel Green, Wisconsin. The time we left was around 10 p.m. We got there. Full moon, inky black dark. We got lost, and 10 minutes later we reached Council Hill Station. To the right runs Kelly Road, which goes directly to the Abley House. Now we drove this windy road into the woods, and at the end of the road was a bridge. Cool. Except it had a large metal bar across it to prevent vehicles from driving back there. Shoot. Well, we had to walk it. Keep in mind, Preston, Tanner, and Chaz thought that we had brought them there to scare them. Right. We had never gone there, hence we got lost. It's about a mile walk into the deep woods to find this haunted house. Immediately, we looked up in the sky and saw weird triangular-shaped aircrafts with colored lights on the bottom that flew up in the air. Strange. Next thing we noticed was the cornfields around it had orbs in it. No lie. Looked like 3 orbs, each the size of a football, in the corn. Corn reaches about 7 feet by late July. We watched these orbs for a few minutes before they disappeared. The other strange thing was that the side opposite of Kelly Road had frogs croaking, crickets, and lightning bugs. The side where the Abley House was had not one lightning bug. Not one. And the ones on the field away from the Abley House had a bunch of fireflies going crazy like I've never seen before. We started our trek and noticed on this full moon night that it was extremely cold, given late July in Wisconsin. Also, we felt out of breath and tired. Sure enough, our cell phones were dying like crazy, and were our flashlights. We had to walk through a train tunnel, which meant train tracks that run through the woods. But there are small tunnels you could go through by foot and ATV. Maybe a small car? In these tunnels, of course, local teens had spray-painted graffiti all over. We took this trek for a while and heard screams and howls in the area. We weren't scared at all. Heard coyotes hundreds of times. We realized we took a wrong fork. There are 2 train tunnels on the way to the Abley House, and took the other one we passed earlier. On the way, we saw rabbits and other animals running away from the house. This is a small trail/gravel road. We were walking it at 11 p.m. The last 150 yards, we felt like we were being watched, as to our left was a huge thicket that no question had something in it. To get a better look at the Abley House, we scaled a 45-degree gravel embankment to get on top of the train tracks. So we were standing on the bridge/train tracks. Nothing strange happened for a few minutes, so I decided to head left across the bridge to see where it went. The other 4 guys stayed on the train tracks and were admiring the house and the clear night. I walked a good 100 yards when I spotted something. At first, it was a shadowy figure hovering above a train light that was in the distance. Then, that shadowy figure passed the light and blocked it out for a few seconds. I was not scared at this point. I slowly took about 10 more steps. Then I saw it. It had crouched on the right of the train tracks in that embankment. Then it stood up. I heard what sounds like someone snapping their knuckles over a microphone. And then it stood into the light. I saw it. It was between 6 and 7 feet tall, gray in color. That was the first thing I noticed. Then I noticed wide shoulders, overdeveloped deltoids, a large patch of fur that was thicker around the neck by a few inches, somewhere between a lion's mane and the fur that was over the rest of its body. Then I saw the head. Looked just like a wolf. Not out of proportion. Glowing white eyes. I saw what would have been its left side of its body. That side was in the train light. Arms were extremely long. The length from the deltoid to the elbows extra short, while the forearms were freakishly long. Huge hands that looked witchy with extra digits. Black talon claws. The legs had well-defined quads. The bottom half of the legs are hocked like a dog. Did not see a tail. His face was scariest. Had a small brow ridge, bright white glowing eyes, teeth that hung out on the sides. Did not notice the smell. Took 3 steps, then immediately went into a trot. When it was running, it was slightly hunched over, almost like when you run at football on defense to tackle them and you're leaning forward. Did not pump its arms. In fact, they almost dangled and were longer than its bottom legs. The hands were limp. I froze. I knew I had to get out. I screamed, "Run out!" I took off towards the other guys, whom then all took off as well. They knew something was up. I ran and went off to the right and took a mad tumble down that embankment into a brush. Tanner followed me while the other 3 did the smart thing and hauled it right back onto the train tracks. I was glad, because I was not thinking of anybody but myself. I took off, and Tanner was 100 yards behind me in a matter of seconds. All I remember is hearing my own heartbeat in my ears and my own breath. I hit the train tunnel, and suddenly stopped, as out of nowhere a light showed up. The only thing that could be out here is a 4-wheeler. I heard Tanner stomping back, and I told him to go shut up and jump back into the brush. Somebody is here. Well, the light got within feet of the tunnel and stopped. No voices, no motor, nothing. I waited 15 to 20 seconds and went through the tunnel and looked where the light was coming. 300 yards, nothing. What? There was nothing there. Was it one of those orbs we saw in the cornfield? Tanner and I booked it back to where we heard the screams and cries of Preston and Chase. Rob looked chalky white. Chase was the youngest and smallest of the group and was, I don't know, catatonic? He was so freaked out that he was mumbling to himself, "werewolf," over and over again. And this really freaked out look on his face that honestly really freaked me out at the time as well. We ran and ducked the bars on the bridge and went into the car and hauled out. All of us were screaming and crying. Well, I'm the one with shaking hands trying to steer my Ford Focus out of there. We never, ever went back to that place, and I'll never go back there, especially at night.